So Class, the new Doctor Who spin-off, is now finished airing in the UK, and because I didn't have the time to do individual episode reviews, I thought I might as well do an overall series review, just to let you guys know exactly what I thought of the first series. So firstly, I'm just going to say that I absolutely loved Class. While I do have some criticisms, as a show just to watch, to sit down and watch and enjoy, it really ticked the box for me. I went into it with positive expectations, and in the months leading up to the broadcast, as we gradually got more information about it, I was thinking, oh yes, okay, yeah, this looks really great. Because, as you might know, I am currently in lower 6th, year 12, just like all the students in Class, so I was thinking, this is actually something that hopefully I should really be able to relate to and enjoy, because I'm exactly the right age, the same age as all the characters. And certainly, from that perspective, it worked very well. Like I say, as a programme to just watch by yourself, or with friends or siblings, and just sit down, relax and enjoy, it was great. Like I say, it just felt really relevant, really. Really dark, cool, and dare I say it, sexy. But it's that kind of feeling, that kind of thing that you want to watch by yourself without your parents or anybody else. It's a kind of show that you can take ownership of, I think, if you're the right age to do so, if you are a young adult. It also felt very fresh, very new, and very, very different, really. Yes, it's a Doctor Who spin-off, but it also felt very different in its own right. And while I do love Doctor Who, and I do love particularly the Capaldi era, as I've spent the last 12 weeks trying to explain to you all, while I do love those episodes, those series, what I loved about Class was how separate it was from Doctor Who. And that might sound a bit strange, a bit contradictory. But really, I think the main thing was that we were just having new characters, and apart from Coal Hill School where we've been before, new locations, new stories. And what fascinated me in particular is that any of the main characters or supporting characters could have been killed off at any point during the series, and some of them were. And I think that gave it more of a feeling of threat or danger than Doctor Who, where the Doctor or companion is going to survive in an episode, and beforehand when they're going to leave at the end of a series, or in a Christmas special or something when there's a new Doctor or a new companion. So that was really nice, and it kind of added to the feel of Class, of being something really quite dangerous. So as far as the main characters go, I've got to say my favourite was probably Miss Quill. I think in real life, well, I'm not too similar to her, but there are aspects of her that I could relate to. Her kind of sarcasm and wit and sassiness. I don't know, she's kind of her own person, really. She doesn't really care much about other people. Well, it's not something that I can relate to on that level, but just the way she's a bit cautious, she kind of distances herself from other people, other relationships. She doesn't really get too involved with the kids or with other adults her age. She's quite individual in that respect. A little bit like the Doctor, and also her rudeness and sarcasm was very similar to the 12th Doctor, particularly in Series 8. As for the other cast, the kids, I found I could relate quite a bit to April, actually. Well, to start with in the series, because from the first episode she kind of appeared as someone who is nice to people, or tries to be nice to people, but kind of keeps her feelings to herself, and George doesn't have too much luck with romance. Obviously some of that changed over the course of the series, and clearly I can't relate to her having half a Shadwick-in heart, but I still quite like her. There's also Charlie, a little bit like me, in some respects, although I'm not gay like him, so there's quite a bit of him actually that I can't relate to at all. Tanya, yes, I quite liked her. To start with, she was quite annoying, because she has those lines of dialogue which she kind of spouts out really quickly. I'm not sure whether that's the writing or the actress who is playing her, Vivian Apara, or a mixture of both, just the character overall. But that appeared quite annoying. But like her, I'm quite a hard worker, so I could relate to those aspects of her. But Ram, however, is one character who I really quite disliked, I think. I mean, to start with, he was this stereotypical, thuggish, brute kind of character. He's not the kind of guy that would naturally get involved with this kind of stuff. I'm not saying the others are, but they're just more kind of suited to it, really. But Ram was a bit more masculine, a bit more of a boy's boy. He played football and did lots of sports, which are two things that I really, really don't like. And he was also quite unkind, really, and unpleasant. And yeah, I know they did more with his character. They broke the mold, the stereotype, and they made him more sweet in a way, maybe. They made him have a bigger heart, and kinder in some ways. But still, there's a lot to dislike about him, I think. Like when he fights with Mateusz in detention. That just brought out a really nasty side to his character, which I didn't like at all. Also, with his relationship with April, while there kind of was something there, and she did like him back, in a way, at times, I thought that maybe he was kind of taking advantage of her a little bit, which, again, wasn't something that I liked particularly. So Ram wasn't a character that I rated very highly. Yeah, I could just about put up with him, but I didn't like him too much. And Mateusz, well, yeah, he was alright, I suppose. Again, you know, he's gay, I'm not, so there wasn't a lot of his character that I could relate to or enjoy, really. He was just kind of there as a moral compass, I suppose, to Charlie, when he was being more prince-like, and debating whether to use the Cabinet of Souls to destroy the Shadowkin. So in terms of individual episodes, my favourites were probably, I think, maybe quite controversially, the first episode and the last. That's For Tonight We Might Die and The Lost. And the reasons for this, really, after a bit of thinking, are that the two things, really. They were set at the school for most of the story, which I quite liked. I liked the way that they used the setting of the school, and they also felt so dangerous, you know, killing off all these cast members so quickly. Like I said earlier, there was a real feeling of threat in those episodes, particularly in The Lost, when you're just there with Ram and his father, and then suddenly blood pours straight out of his dad's mouth, and the Shadowkin guy just appears behind him and he's dead. You know, there was no going back, which I quite liked. With Tanya's mum as well, with Mr. Armitage, Rachel, there were so many characters that got killed so brutally, and so definitively, really. And particularly in the first and last episodes, that was something I enjoyed. I've said I like how they were set at the school, and to develop that a bit more, really, I just liked how they used the setting of Coal Hill, the school in particular and surrounding area, just with all the different families and all the locations. Because if there's one criticism that I have with Class, is that I didn't really feel it explored the whole location of the school that well. I mean, take Torchwood for example. It was set in Cardiff with the Rift, with the Torchwood hub, and most episodes, at least in the first series, apart from Countryside really, every single one was set in the hub, you know, and they kind of branched out from there. They went to different places from there. You'd have the Royal Del Place in most episodes, you know, the Rift, the big water tower. That would be present in every single episode. And in Class, Coal Hill School wasn't in every single episode, I don't think. And even if it was in some episodes, for example, Night Visiting, it was just there briefly, as a means of the Lankin getting through to this world. And I think, particularly as such an important location in Doctor Who history, it's Coal Hill School, I think it should have been used more. And like the Torchwood Hub, like Cardiff, just more embraced really. And they should have just maybe stuck to more traditional stories, because we had so many different alien planets, particularly in the Metaphysical Engine, or what Quill did, and also in the Shadowkin two-parter, episodes 4 and 5. There was also Detained, episode 6, which was one episode, 40 minutes, set in one classroom. So while it was set in the school, we didn't get to see much of the school. And after a whole two-parter, which was set mostly on an alien planet, particularly in the second half, which was straight before this story, I think at times Class felt like it wasn't using Coal Hill enough. It was just there as something in the background. And part of me feels that they tried too many experimental type things in this series, like the alien planets, like, you know, 45 minutes, one classroom, all the main cast together, a bit like Heaven Sent in Series 9, and of course the Metaphysical Engine, with barely any Coal Hill at all, where Quill just goes off on her own mission. I just feel that maybe those are ideas which could have been postponed into Series 2, you know, assuming there will be a Series 2, and in Series 1, the format of episodes could have been a little bit more traditional in a way, like with Torchwood, you know, have Coal Hill, the school there, the families maybe, the cast, and have a new monster of the week for them to defeat in that week's episode. That's the other thing as well as not spending too much time at Coal Hill overall in the grand scheme of the series, there weren't actually that many aliens. And in many interviews, Patrick Ness said, well, ironically, it was actually in the interviews about there being no Doctor Who monsters, which of course proved to be wrong. But in that interview, part of his reasoning, his fake reasoning for not including Doctor Who monsters, was that he wanted to use new monsters, create new alien creatures, and explore that world fully. And to me, he didn't really deliver on that. I mean, half of the series had the Shadowkin as the main villain. I don't agree with the statement they were overused, which I've heard many people say, because they were used well in just about all 4 of the stories they were in. But I don't know, part of me feels that for an 8-episode run, to have them in half of the series is a bit much. I mean, maybe if it was 13 episodes long or 12, it would have been a different story. You know, if it was 12 episodes long, that's just a third of the series. But in an 8-episode run, that's half your series taken up by the Shadowkin. So that means that apart from the Shadowkin, the only other alien creatures that we actually met were the dragon thing in episode 2, the Lankin in episode 3, the weird prisoner guy that we don't even see physically in episode 6, and then in episode 7, well, there isn't really a main villain in episode 7, but we do get to see the Arn and the Quill Goddess. But then again, they are metaphysical, so quite like the prisoner and detained, they're not really real, and we don't really get to see much of them physically, get to see much of what they do. I mean, the Quill Goddess was impressive, I will admit, and it was nice to see her in action, but I just feel that overall, there wasn't a lot of alien action in the series. I mean, the Lankin, for example, it was a great creature, a great creation, and Night Visiting was one of the strongest episodes in my opinion, even though it was set mostly in Tanya's house, and not in the school. But the Lankin, they were a great monster, but all they kind of were made up of were those tentacle things all over London, which was a great image, yes, but then they ended in these human, duplicates of Tanya's father, or Quill's sister, and that wasn't a unique alien design. I mean, don't get me wrong, they were really spooky. Like Tanya's dad, when you first see him, you're just like, oh god, what the hell? How is that her dad? He looks so scary. And you instantly know it's an alien. But at the same time, it's just a human playing him. And I feel that maybe in the series, there were some missed opportunities to use more aesthetically and physically interesting and unique creatures. I just feel that they could have gone to town with that a little bit more, have some more unique designs, and yeah, just use more monsters of the week. So that probably sounded quite negative, but there was also a lot to like about Class. I mean, the first episode, yes, was great. I absolutely loved it from the word go. And Peter Capaldi, when he came in at the end of the first episode, oh, that was just such a climax. To have him there, defeating the Shadowkin, it was a really great moment. And I feel that instead of undermining the ability of these teenagers to defend the Earth, Peter Capaldi's appearance as the Doctor actually cemented this spin-off into the Doctor Who universe in our heads. This is actually part of the Doctor Who world, and it gave it a more tangible link. The coach with the dragon tattoo wasn't my favourite episode. There were bits of it that I liked. For instance, the school inspector. I just loved his interactions with Miss Quill. That was absolutely hilarious to watch. And the whole thing about him being from the Governors was a nice mystery that was set up then. The actual climax of that story and the appearance of the dragon, well, the whole idea of the dragon, it was a good idea, but I just felt, I don't know. I mean, the CGI dragon actually looked quite tacky, and the whole climax with Ram comparing his loss of Rachel to the dragon's loss of his mate in the other universe or wherever it was, it felt a bit tenuous and a little bit forced from Ram, who, without wanting to sound mean, doesn't seem to be the brightest spark. I don't think he would have made that link in his head in a normal situation. And the way he delivered it as well, yeah, I dislike Ram, as I've already explained. It just didn't do me any favours. But then Night Visiting, yes, what a fantastic episode. The whole thing with Tanya's dad and the Lankin, and also Quill's sister as well, allowed for some brilliant character development and interesting scenes. And then the Shadowkin two-parter, there were some good bits of the episode, like Dorothy Amy, I think she's called, the new headmistress. She was a great addition to the Class universe, even though it was such a shame to see Mr. Armitage go. He was such a great character. But never mind. She was also a great headmistress for the school. And of course there was more to her than that. There was a sense of mystery about her. And the whole thing about the Governors was starting to become more clear. And, new questions were being asked while other ones were being answered. The Petal invasion in this two-parter was alright. Like some people have said, it was a bit too similar to the Cube invasion in The Power of Three. But it worked well for the story. But one thing I didn't like too much, particularly in episode 4, were all those Shadowkin scenes with just the Shadowkin. I mean, to start with, they were quite boring, really, and the whole colour palette was dark because it's the shadow world, so visually it was quite uninteresting as well. And you also couldn't always hear what they were saying to each other. You know, usually when there's a human there, providing a bit of context, even though the Shadowkin voices aren't the clearest, it makes more sense what they're talking about. But with just Shadowkin, not only was it boring, but also the dialogue wasn't very clear, which wasn't great. But luckily the Shadowkin world was used much better in Part 2, Bravish Heart, and the showdown with April and Shadowkin was a really epic moment, one of the best of the series. And unlike Ram's parallel in Episode 2 that I've already mentioned, the bit where April's dad tries to persuade her to not take a life was actually really moving and worked really very well. And yeah, I mean, he's a guy that's been in prison, he's had time to think about his actions and kind of reconsider them, really. Ram, his girlfriend, died. Yes, that's a hell of an experience, but the link there between that and the dragon was a bit too tenuous in my opinion, as I've already mentioned. But here it worked so much better, because like I say, April's dad had learnt from his experiences, sort of, and was kind of helping to build her character, which was quite nice. Episode 6, Detained, it wasn't my favourite actually. I mean, I've only seen the last 3 once. I've actually seen all the other ones at least 2 times. But Detained, I don't know, again it just felt quite boring, and most of the revelations that the cast had seemed quite obvious. But having said that, it was a good episode. There was some nice character development, but I don't rate it quite as highly as some other people might. On the other hand, the metaphysical engine, or what Quill did, episode 7, was a great addition to the series, and it was really nice to see these alien worlds, despite not being set in London, in Coal Hill School, for the 2nd episode in a row. It was still nice to have this space mission, and it's really interesting as well, really tense, to see if Miss Quill would be successful in removing the arm from her head. Of course, the whole thing with Ballon as well, her relationship with him, was so unexpected in my opinion. And I thought the part at the end where they had to decide which one of them would die, which one of them would escape back to Earth. God, I thought that was played out absolutely brilliantly. Fantastic drama, you know, really thought-provoking, making you go, how are they going to resolve this situation? But of course, Quill got back, and she was pregnant. Now, the whole thing about her being pregnant, I got it eventually. I have to say on first watch, I sort of got it, but because it wasn't confirmed on screen, it wasn't too obvious, and I feel that maybe some other viewers might have missed that as well, because it was just a subtle bump when she collapsed on the floor that you could see. But once I'd come to terms with that, I thought it was a great plot twist to have her pregnant. And Ballon being the father as well, a shapeshifter, complicated things even more. And it'll be really interesting to see where that plot thread goes in Series 2, if the show is recommissioned. The Lost episode 8, oh wow, it was probably my favourite of them all. Like I say, the threat level from the start was just so high, and the whole thing felt so dangerous, so tense. We knew there were plot threads that had to be resolved, and the Shadowkin had to be defeated, the Cabinet of Souls had to be used, and Patrick Ness really did deliver. He didn't shy away from, you know, putting our characters in difficult situations and making them make difficult decisions. And while ultimately not one of the main cast died, as we kind of expected, they were still all really emotionally affected, whether that be by a loss of a parent, or Ram with the physical loss of April's body, or Charlie having to use the cabinet and living with that for the rest of his life. You know, it's only really Quill that escapes from it without having been through too much. Although having said that, she was pregnant for the whole of the story, and still is by the end of the episode. And of course, the whole Governors thing. Oh wow. I kind of suspected the Doctor Who monster was going to show up, because on one of the Doctor Who TV teasers, it was very strongly implied that was going to be the case, because they said that something that Patrick Ness has said in multiple interviews is a great fat lie. And I thought, yeah, it's probably that comment about there being no Doctor Who monsters, particularly with it being the last episode of the series, leading into Series 10 possibly, and God, I was right. But I never expected it to be the Weaving Angels, never in a million years did that cross my mind. I know some people feel they've had their time, but really the whole thing with the Governors, and with the headmistress, Mrs. Amy's, it just felt so tense and chilling, and the moment she was disposed of as well. The whole thing about the arrival set up in this episode, and that big tablet with the image of the angel on it over London. It just felt so unexpected and shocking, but in a good way. It worked for me really, really well. What I'm not too happy about is not knowing whether this is going to be something that's going to be explored further in Series 10, possibly make up some of the story arc and lead into a Moffat plot, or whether it's something that's exclusive to Class that Patrick Ness plans to develop in the second series, assuming it is recommissioned. But if that is the case and the show isn't recommissioned, then he's going to have a bit of a problem. That's the other thing as well. While I kind of like the way that April now inhabits the body of a Shadowkin, part of me feels, well, A, there wasn't really much of a sense of closure on that front, because it's kind of leading into Series 2, which means if there isn't a Series 2, then it's not going to work at all. But also, it's a nice shock, yes, but practically, how is that going to work in a future series? You know, we've got a Shadowkin body walking around Coal Hill, walking around London. Surely she'd have to get a perception filter or become a shapeshifter or something somehow. I don't know, but it would make it really awkward having, well, A, having to kind of lip sync Sophie Hopkins' voice to whoever is inside that costume, and having her as part of the team, having her defeat aliens with them and walking around. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's something they've thought about really. It was a good bombshell to end the series on, but at the same time, one can't help but think how impractical it will be if a second series is commissioned. But yeah, that is my thoughts on Class. Actually, in hindsight, most of that probably sounded quite negative, but really, well, yes, while I do have criticisms with Class, while it wasn't perfect, while there were moments where I kind of felt a bit disappointed, a bit let down, the overall feeling of threat and danger, and just how relevant it was as well, and more aimed at adults, Class is something that I've really been able to take ownership of, something that I only watch by myself, or with people my age, because, yeah, it's that kind of young adult thing, specifically for young adults, and that's kind of what I like about it so much. You know, it's not suitable for younger viewers, it's more mature than that, and yeah, as someone who's now grown up and, you know, beyond that stage, it just felt like something that I could really enjoy. And as I say, while it's not always been perfect, not each episode, every single week I have been itching to see the new episode of Class every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. So it certainly did well to kind of grab my interest and get me invested in the programme. You know, it's that kind of feeling that I couldn't wait until the next instalment. I couldn't wait to see what happened next. And while the next instalment didn't always deliver, it was still exciting to see what did happen. And overall, yeah, Class was just a very cool, very exciting series. Very fresh, very different, and for those reasons, even though it's not always quite hit the mark, I would personally deem Class a success, and I would definitely like to see a second series. However, whether the BBC will invest in a second series or not is yet to be seen, because from what we've seen so far, although Class hasn't been aired on TV, which I think is a bit of a stupid decision, the BBC 3 iPlayer ratings haven't been too great. Which is a shame, but you know, I've talked about this many times before in defending Series 9. Maybe young adults just aren't interested in Doctor Who. Maybe the audience isn't going to get any bigger. You know, there isn't anybody my age that I know in my school that has really got into Class, and as a consequence got into Doctor Who through Class. That's not something that I've seen happen, and I can't really work out whether that's a problem or not, whether that's just down to the way that young adults and teenagers are these days, or whether something needs to change. But nevertheless, it would be a shame to not see a second series, because there's certainly potential with all the loose hanging plot threads that still need to be resolved, and the whole thing with the Weeping Angels, the Governors, the Arrival. If that's not brought up again in Doctor Who Series 10, surely we need another series of Class to explore that concept further. So thank you so much for watching this review. Please let me know what you think of Class below, and if you haven't watched the series yet, or got to the end of the series, if you maybe watched the first few and thought it wasn't your thing, you know, do give it a chance, because I think particularly if you're my age, particularly if you're in that young adult bracket that the show is aimed at, it really is something for you, and you're definitely missing out if you're that age and you've not watched it yet. I'd also like to give a quick complimentary plug to the Class tie-in novels released by the BBC. Like the TV series, they don't quite always hit the mark, but overall they capture the essence of the show really well, and provide some great character development and insights into relationships that don't develop that much on screen. I'm thinking in particular of Ram and April, who just kind of get together like that on screen. But in the novels, there's much more about how the relationship gets going, and what kind of goes on between the two of them. You know, more scenes with the two of them, showing how the relationship develops and comes to fruition. So if you're a fan of the show, I would definitely recommend reading them. I personally couldn't put them down. I read the first one I got in under 48 hours and immediately ordered the next one to be delivered the next day because I was that desperate to see what happens next and to get my fix of Class before the next TV episode. If you haven't read them yet and you're missing Class or having withdrawal symptoms, again, I would definitely recommend them to get your Class fix now the first series is over. I'll be back in the coming weeks to do lots more videos, probably lots of Christmas related ones. My next review style video I've got planned is a review of the Christmas special this year, The Return of Dr. Mysterio, so please stick around for that and subscribe if you haven't already. So again, thank you so much for watching, and bye for now guys.